I just spoke with Duncan Hart. He was the lone guy that brought an action against Coles, his employer, in the Fair Work Commission. And he was able to show, and the full bench ruled in his favour, that many Coles workers were disadvantaged by the EBA signed or reached between the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association and Coles. Why do the SDAs keep signing agreements with large employers that appear to be against the financial interest of low-paid workers?
Well, I'm glad that this agreement's been rectified. I'm glad that...
Well, it hasn't yet. It's got 10 days. But
well, I assume... Sorry, you're quite right, but I assume that all of the parties to this agreement will rectify the points which were made by the full bench.
But the SDAs keep signing these major agreements on behalf of low-paid workers that appear to be against their interests, their financial interests.
I'm not here to defend the SDA. My job, though, is to make sure that we've got a workplace relations system which is fair. Now, I've been a strong defender of having the independent umpire make these decisions based upon the best evidence, and there's been a crucial point of difference between myself and Mr Turnbull. We've insisted, both in our time in government and in opposition, there be something called a no disadvantage test or a better off overall test, and it's upon that this decision has been made by the independent umpire. Mr Turnbull's voted against putting these safeguards into the system. In terms of the union, you have to ask the union about concerns that individual members have with them.
Let me play for you what Duncan Hart, this young man, just said.
I thought that his position where he argued that he wouldn't cause any fuss if the Fair Work Commission cut penalty rates was a pretty appalling one. I thought it showed a total lack of, any sort of political will from the supposed leader of the Labor Party to defend workers' rights, and I thought that was pathetic. And I also think that the response generally of Labor figures to my case has been pretty not particularly positive, because I think it shows up failings of the Fair Work Commission that they've allowed these agreements, because as I said, it's not just Coles, it's also has implications for Woolies and McDonald's and so many other agreements. All of these agreements have been passed by the Fair Work Commission, and yet all we've seen from Labor is just a defence of the Fair Work Commission as if they are still playing this, what's the word?
Honest broker role?
Yeah, a broker role, whereas I think actually there's got to be big questions asked about what is the purpose of the Fair Work Commission if they are passing agreements that breach minimum award conditions, and if the Labor Party won't fight for workers' rights around penalty rates when they are so blatantly being breached in such a large scale. We're talking about the biggest companies in Australia. Well, it just really, I think, shreds to any credibility of their claim to fight for penalty rate.
And that's the young man who's in today's Australian. He wants to know if you are the man who represents the working class, the underpaid, the poor and the oppressed, and you're not defending them in places like the Fair Work Commission, and you're not going to do anything about the SDAs either.
Well, the assumption that you're making there is wrong.
Well, he called it pathetic.
So
you lack political will?
I'll just answer your question in your statements. The reason why I say your assumptions are wrong is that the independent umpire are the ones who've made the decision to go back and get the agreement reworked. What's happened in the last couple of days is proof positive that the system actually does work. Now, I can share frustration if an agreement's got passed which upon subsequent review doesn't meet standard, but that's why we have a no disadvantage test. If we go down the path...
This lone person had to basically go by himself to the Fair Work Commission and argue a case that the Shop Distributive Allied Employees Union should have done in the first place. 77,000 workers, 30,000 of them disadvantaged, and one poor little Marxist from Brisbane took the case against Coles and basically won. Where was the Labor movement in this?
Well, first of all, I said at the opening of this discussion, I'm glad that the agreement has been rectified, or will be in the next 10 days, I assume, by the parties involved. But when you go to this core issue about the role of the independent umpire, I know that for the last 110 years, conciliation and arbitration, the ability to have an honest broker at the end of the day, hear the complaints and hear the concerns and hear the appeals, is what gives workers a voice. The idea that if you took away the independent umpire, that somehow miraculously you just trusted parliaments to set the conditions in every Australian workplace, that would be providing a loaded gun for a future Conservative government to radically reduce conditions in Australia. The whole reason we have penalty rates is because cases have been made by unions using evidence to introduce them. Goes back to 1907, after the Second World War and much more recently. So
Okay.
having a no disadvantage test with a Labor government supporting defensive penalty rates, I put in a submission, the first opposition leader to do so in Federation history, supporting the position of keeping penalty rates in the 5 awards which are currently being reviewed.
I want to take some more